You are in Last Memories, and I'm Timothy. Today, I'm covering the most horrifying influencer deaths ever caught on film. And I'll be honest with you, these stories kept me up all night. From a vlogger who pushed a car past 85 on a freeway, to a prankster who pointed a weapon at a stranger, which ended his night in the craziest way possible. It was June 18, 2017 in Phoenix, Arizona. The afternoon sun was doing what it always does in Phoenix in June, pressing down hard on everything, baking the asphalt, heat shimmering above lanes, the air itself wavering in the distance. The freeway was busy the way Phoenix freeways get in the late afternoon, not gridlocked, but dense. 6 lanes of vehicles moving at roughly 65 to 70 miles per hour, spaced close enough that any sudden move would ripple through traffic fast. It was the kind of driving environment where margins for error are thin and consequences arrive even faster. Kelly Vost was 24 years old. He worked part-time at a car wash, just enough to keep going while he chased something else. For Kelly, that was his auto vlog. Around 4,200 followers, mostly people who liked watching him weave through traffic at speed. He had a personality that leaned hard into confidence, the kind of guy who believed his reflexes were sharper than the situation required. People who knew him described someone who got louder and bolder the more eyes were on him. He fed off the reaction. And on June 18th, a lot of people were watching, live, comments pushing him faster, feeding the momentum he was already building. He had announced the live highway run ahead of time, scheduled it, promoted it. He borrowed a 2012 Dodge Charger and brought a friend along to film from the passenger seat, phone mounted to the dashboard. What stands out is how deliberate it all was. He chose the time, the road, the car, and the car had worn rear tires, tread visibly low, and a cracked windshield. That detail matters more than it seems. Because when you're pushing a borrowed car past 80 miles per hour through dense traffic, the condition of what's keeping you on the road is everything. Worn tires don't just reduce grip, they overheat and lose traction faster, especially under sudden lateral movement. When Kelly merged onto the freeway, he accelerated quickly to approximately 85 miles per hour, well above traffic. Vehicles around him were spaced 1 to 2 car lengths apart, leaving almost no room to maneuver. He cut across 2 lanes in quick succession, passing with clearances that looked controlled until they weren't. From the footage, the gaps weren't dramatic, just tight enough to be dangerous. At that speed, each lane change had no recovery margin, only commitment. Then he approached a box truck. The gap between the box truck and a sedan was less than 2 feet. He went for it anyway. While shifting lanes, the worn rear tires lost traction. Not gradually, instantly, like the grip just disappeared. The rear fishtailed sharply. He corrected and then overcorrected, amplifying the spin. At 85 miles per hour, there's no second chance. The front passenger side clipped the rear corner of the box truck. That contact fully destabilized the car, turning a mistake into a loss of control. The Charger spun and slammed driver's side first into the concrete barrier. The impact crushed the driver's side cabin inward about 12 inches, collapsing into his space. The steering column buckled back. His body was thrown forward and left, the seatbelt locking too late. His chest struck the collapsing wheel with concentrated force. The car rebounded into traffic. A second vehicle struck the passenger side, compounding damage and compressing the cabin further, leaving even less survivable space. Kelly did not move after that second impact. The live stream kept running for roughly 40 seconds. Deployed airbags, a heavily deformed cabin. The driver's side door was bent inward where he had been sitting. No movement, just the engine struggling and distant horns building around the wreck. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Kelly was pronounced dead at the scene from blunt force trauma, catastrophic chest compression from the lateral impact. His passenger survived with a fractured arm and multiple lacerations. Investigators cited 3 primary factors: excessive speed, unsafe lane changes, and the worn rear tires, directly linked to the loss of traction. The car was removed, the freeway reopened, and that's where the record ends. What stays with me is the tire detail. He got into that car knowing the tread was worn. He merged at 85 miles per hour anyway, with a camera rolling. The danger wasn't hidden. It was right there under the car the whole time. A failure already in motion before he accelerated, waiting for the exact moment it mattered most. Sometimes the thing that kills you isn't a surprise. It's the thing you already knew about and chose to ignore. And if Kelly's story taught me anything, it's that the most preventable outcomes start with the smallest ignored details. And once momentum takes over, there is no correcting it. And the next one I came across proved you don't even need a freeway, just a hole in the ground, a sheet of plywood, and the belief that nothing could go wrong. It was October 3rd, 2016, on the rural outskirts of Des Moines, Iowa. The weather had been cool and damp for days, the kind of early October stretch where the ground stays soft and the air carries that heavy, earthy smell of wet soil. The location was a stretch of private farmland, recently tilled, with loose topsoil that clumped together when you grabbed it. Flat terrain in every direction, no nearby structures, no foot traffic, just open land and the kind of quiet that makes you forget how far you are from anything. Moira Flitch was 21 years old. She worked at a small retail store, nothing glamorous, the kind of job where you're folding the same shirts and restocking the same shelves week after week. Her real interest was her online page where she posted DIY challenge videos. About 3,100 followers. Not huge, but enough to keep her motivated. She had a creative streak and a habit of pushing ideas further than most people would. The kind of person who heard a dare and immediately started planning logistics. She wasn't reckless in the traditional sense. She prepared, she organized, she thought things through. The problem was that her version of thinking things through didn't always account for what could actually go wrong. The idea was a buried alive endurance test. She had spent 2 days digging a hole on a friend's farmland, approximately 6 feet deep and about 3 feet wide, just wide enough to lie flat in. She sourced a sheet of standard plywood to use as a cover. Not reinforced, not load-rated, just regular plywood from a hardware store. She also brought a flexible garden hose, which she planned to thread through the soil as a breathing tube. 2 friends were there to assist. Their job was to shovel soil over the plywood while recording. I want to pause here because this is the part that gets me. She planned this over 2 days, dug the hole herself, gathered materials, and at no point did anyone involved stop to question whether a thin sheet of plywood could hold the weight of 2 feet of damp, compacted soil. That's not hindsight. That's basic physics. But when you're focused on the content, on how it's going to look, sometimes the most obvious risks become invisible. Moira climbed into the hole and lay flat at the bottom. There wasn't much room to shift around. The walls were close on either side. The plywood was placed over the opening, resting directly on the soil edges with no structural support underneath. No frame, no bracing, nothing distributing the load. Just a flat sheet sitting on dirt. Her friends began shoveling. The soil piled up gradually, forming a layer approximately 2 feet thick on top of the plywood. According to the 2 friends present, everything seemed fine at first. The hose was in place. Moira was underneath. The camera was rolling. About 6 minutes in, the plywood started to flex. The damp soil had compacted more densely than dry soil would, adding weight unevenly across the surface. The garden hose, threaded alongside the plywood edge, began to shift under the pressure. It partially kinked, reducing whatever airflow it had been providing. Then the plywood bowed further and cracked along its center line. Soil dropped into the cavity suddenly, striking Moira's chest and face. More followed immediately. Loose, heavy, wet earth filling the space around her torso and neck. The weight compressed her chest, restricting the expansion needed to breathe. Soil entered her mouth and nose as the space filled. Her ability to move became restricted within seconds as the surrounding pressure locked her in place. Her 2 friends started digging immediately, but compacted, damp soil doesn't move easily. It's heavy. It sticks together. Every shovelful they pulled out felt like it wasn't enough. By the time they uncovered her upper body, she was unresponsive. I've spent 3 hours researching soil compression and burial mechanics for this story, and the thing that shocked me most is that just 2 feet of wet soil can exert over 300 pounds of force on a surface, meaning the moment those shovels stopped, she was already trapped under a weight no human could push off from a lying position. Emergency responders arrived after being contacted by the 2 friends on scene. Resuscitation was attempted, but unsuccessful. Moira was pronounced dead at the location. The official cause was asphyxiation, chest compression from the weight of the soil, and airway obstruction from soil entering her mouth and nose. Investigators confirmed the plywood failure as the direct cause of the collapse. It was standard construction-grade material, never designed to bear a distributed load of wet soil. The garden hose was found partially kinked and displaced. Both friends were interviewed at length. No charges were filed. The site was documented and left undisturbed after processing. Moira's page was taken down within a week. The video never went public. What remains is a police report, a hole in a field, and a sheet of plywood that was never meant to hold anything heavier than rain. And I keep thinking about that. how she spent 2 days preparing for something that failed in 6 minutes. But if Moira's story is about what happens when you trust your plan more than the forces working against it, the next one I came across is about what happens when you add a new variable to an already dangerous situation, one that doesn't just raise the stakes, but quietly removes your only chance of surviving them. It was April 12, 2018, in Chicago, Illinois. It was nighttime, the kind of Chicago night where the city hum fades once you get far enough from the main streets, where the only light comes from distant street lamps and whatever glow bleeds off the skyline. The location was a pair of abandoned buildings in an industrial stretch, side by side, separated by a narrow alley. The rooftops were flat, concrete-edged, and roughly 30 feet above ground level. The gap between them measured approximately 10 feet, not a distance you'd think twice about on flat ground, but 30 feet up at night with no safety equipment. 10 feet becomes a very different number. Jordy Gann was 26 years old. He worked at a warehouse. Long shifts, physical labor, the kind of work that wears your body down but doesn't ask much of your attention. His real focus was his stunt content. Around 4,800 followers built mostly on rooftop jumps between abandoned or unsecured buildings. He had been doing this long enough to build a confidence that, in my opinion, had started replacing caution. The plan was a nighttime jump across the 10-foot gap with a fire element for visual effect. He set up a makeshift ramp using a flat wooden board near the roof's edge, then poured gasoline across the surface. The idea: ignite the ramp, run through the flames, clear the gap, land on the other side. 2 friends were positioned on the opposite rooftop to film from different angles. I want to stop here for a second, because when I look at the setup, gasoline on a wooden surface you need to sprint across, the problem isn't just the fire, it makes the surface slick. And when your entire jump depends on traction in your last step, that changes everything. But nobody on that rooftop was thinking about traction. They were thinking about how it would look on camera. Jordy ignited the ramp. The gasoline caught quickly, flames spreading unevenly, rising about 2 to 3 feet high. The fuel pooled in patches, creating hotter pockets where flames surged higher and moved unpredictably, licking across the board in uneven waves and flaring without warning. In the dark, the visual was exactly what he wanted. He started his running approach. The rooftop was flat enough to build speed, and he needed a full sprint to clear the gap. From the footage, you can see him accelerating toward the edge, committed, no hesitation. Then he stepped onto the ramp. The gasoline had created a slick layer on the wood. His lead foot slipped forward, not dramatically, just enough to break his stride at the worst moment. His balance shifted. His trailing foot dragged through a concentrated pool of burning fuel. And this time, the contact didn't just disrupt his footing, it lingered. The heat caught along the fabric of his shoe and lower pant leg, sharp and immediate, enough to break his rhythm at the exact moment he needed control. Instead of planting cleanly, his step slid forward. The jump came early, off balance, underpowered. His lower leg struck the far edge of the opposite rooftop. The impact stopped his forward momentum instantly while the rest of his body kept moving. His weight carried over the edge, hands reaching out against bare concrete that gave nothing back. There was nothing to grab. But the critical moment wasn't the fall, it was the step before it. The fraction of a second where traction failed and there was no way to recover. He went over. The fall was approximately 30 feet into the alley below. His body rotated slightly during the descent, the brief flame along his lower leg still visible for a moment as he dropped, before striking the metal edge of a dumpster, then the ground. Both camera angles captured the entire sequence, the slip, the failed landing, and the drop that followed without interruption. The impact disrupted the burn immediately. What remained of the flame died out against the concrete within seconds. Movement stopped almost immediately after impact. His 2 friends descended and contacted emergency services. Jordy was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries consistent with the fall. Minor thermal damage was noted along the lower leg, consistent with brief contact with burning fuel at the point of takeoff. Investigators documented the use of accelerant as a direct contributing factor. The gasoline didn't just create the visual, it removed the one thing the jump depended on: traction. Jordy's friends uploaded nothing. The footage was seized, the accounts went dark, and 4,800 followers never saw the video he died making. What stayed with me wasn't the fall, it was the step before it. The moment where everything was already lost, and he didn't know yet. And the next story I found had that same moment. Different setting, different risk, but the same gap between feeling in control and finding out you never were. It was August 27th, 2015, somewhere in the Everglades area of Florida. Late August in the Everglades is exactly what you'd imagine. Heavy, humid air that sits on you like a wet blanket. The kind of heat that doesn't let up even when the sun dips. The location was a canal bank on the edge of a rural stretch, away from any marked trails or public access points. The water was dark, still, and opaque. You couldn't see more than a few inches below the surface. The bank itself was soft, muddy ground that sloped gently toward the waterline. There were warning signs in the area, posted by local wildlife authorities, advising people to keep their distance. This was known alligator territory. Animals commonly estimated between 8 and 11 feet had been spotted here regularly. Tressa Krell was 23 years old. She worked as a server, the kind of job that fills your evenings and leaves your days open. She used that free time to run a wildlife-themed page online. About 3,600 followers. Her content was built around getting close to animals, closer than most people would be comfortable with. She had a genuine fascination with wildlife, but it came paired with a habit of ignoring boundaries that exist for a reason. She had filmed near animals before, often well inside distances that warning signs told you not to cross. It hadn't gone wrong yet, and I think that's the most dangerous pattern a person can fall into. Repeated proximity without consequence starts to feel like skill. The plan was to film a hand-feeding clip with an alligator. A friend filmed from approximately 15 feet away on slightly elevated ground along the canal edge, with a clear line of sight to both Tressa and the water. I need to say this plainly. She went to a known alligator canal with raw meat, intending to lure one of these animals to within arm's reach. The warning signs were visible, the water was opaque, and she crouched within 3 to 4 feet of the bank. A lot of you asked me after my last video why people don't just leave when the signs are right there telling them to. This case is exactly why that question haunts me. The water was calm. According to the footage recovered from the friend's camera, Tressa spent some time repeatedly lowering bait into the water, pulling it back, trying to coax movement from below the surface. Then the outline of a large alligator became faintly visible just beneath the waterline, moving slowly toward the bait. Tressa leaned forward, extending her arm to keep the chicken just out of reach, trying to draw it closer to the bank, closer to the camera. What happened next took less than a second. The alligator lunged in a rapid burst. That's how these animals operate, still until they're not. And the closing speed across a short distance is something most people drastically underestimate. Its jaws clamped onto her forearm. The sudden pull combined with the soft, muddy bank caused her footing to give way almost instantly. She was dragged into the water. Once in the canal, the alligator initiated a partial roll. The water was shallow enough near the bank that a full death roll wasn't possible, but the lateral spinning was enough to disorient and submerge her repeatedly. Her body struck submerged roots and the canal edge during rotation. The alligator released briefly to adjust its grip, then bit again higher along the arm and shoulder. A second, slower roll followed, keeping her submerged for longer intervals. The water became heavily disturbed. Sediment rose from the bottom, dropping visibility to nearly zero. From the friend's position, the footage captured splashing, then increasingly disturbed water, and then stillness. The opaque surface revealed nothing after that. The friend contacted emergency services immediately. Responders arrived to an empty canal edge. Authorities later located the alligator nearby and recovered remains within the same vicinity. The official conclusion was that deliberate feeding and close proximity triggered a predatory response. The raw chicken, the fishing line, the repeated baiting, all drew the animal into a range where its natural behavior took over. Investigators documented the warning signage and confirmed Tressa had been well within distances explicitly advised against. The area was processed and reopened under existing wildlife warnings. No changes were made to signage or access points. I came across John's case and it broke that framework completely, because John had the same pattern, the same escalation, the same belief that he understood the risk because he'd done it before. But this time, the danger wasn't an animal acting on instinct. It was a person who had been watching that pattern, studying it, and building something designed to make sure the next time wasn't like the other times. It was January 9th, 2018 in Dallas, Texas. Night had settled in, and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, cold enough that people moved quickly between their cars and wherever they were headed. The setting was a small parking lot beside a strip of businesses, most already closed or in the process of shutting down. Lighting was sparse, with a few overhead lamps casting uneven pools across the asphalt while large sections remained in near darkness. It was the kind of place where you instinctively walked faster, details blurred at a distance, shadows blending in ways that made depth hard to judge. Not the kind of environment where you could clearly identify what someone was holding from 20 feet away. John Swiv was 25, working at a small electronics repair shop, screen replacements, battery swaps, nothing corporate. The steady job paid the bills, but his focus was his prank channel, which had grown to around 4,500 followers. His content revolved around staged confrontations with unsuspecting people, provoking reactions from those who didn't know they were being filmed. Over time, he developed a sense of what he could get away with. The stronger the reaction, the better the video performed. As the channel grew, so did the intensity of the setups, each successful upload reinforcing the idea that the risk remained under control. The fan watching him saw something different. Not escalation, but pattern, repetition, predictable movement. To them, the reactions had stopped being real because the outcomes were controlled. Instead of losing interest, they began studying him, how he approached, how he timed it, where he stepped, even how long he held eye contact before triggering a reaction. Casual viewing turned into structured observation. John agreed to meet, believing it was a collaboration. For the fan, it was an opportunity to remove the safety built into the performance. Footage recovered from a friend's parked vehicle showed John waiting near the edge of the lot. The camera, positioned about 30 feet away, had a clear view through the windshield. Across the asphalt was a narrow strip, slightly darker than the surrounding surface, subtle enough to disappear under uneven lighting. A man exited one of the closing businesses and walked toward his car, alone, his pace steady and unaware. John approached, following the same structure he used in previous videos. That consistency made the setup possible. Earlier that night, a concealed metal plate had been set into a small section of the pavement, creating a direct conductive surface, while the surrounding asphalt remained dry and resistive, breaking continuity across most of the area. A second contact point was placed to briefly complete a circuit, only under precise foot placement. Not a stable path, but a momentary bridge. As John stepped forward, his leading foot hit the plate while the trailing foot crossed the second point. The circuit partially formed, not cleanly, but in uneven bursts. His body reacted instantly. The first jolt was violent and uncoordinated, muscles firing out of sequence before breaking, reconnecting, and surging again as contact shifted beneath him. His balance collapsed, posture distorting as voluntary control disappeared. From the camera's perspective, the shift was immediate, controlled movement unraveling into something erratic and unstable. His breathing fractured into short, ineffective spasms as the current disrupted his diaphragm. He went down in stages, hitting the pavement as the electrical contact flickered unpredictably, cutting out when his body shifted, then re-engaging as limbs or clothing reconnected with the conductive points. The instability didn't reduce the effect, it intensified it, each surge interrupting any chance of recovery and forcing repeated involuntary contractions. At the edge of the lot, the fan remained still. There was no attempt to intervene. The delivery wasn't constant. It came in pulses, each one forcing another involuntary reaction. The movements in John's body became smaller, then irregular, losing coordination as control never returned. His cardiac rhythm degraded into erratic activity before stopping entirely. When the current finally ceased, his body went still. The entire sequence was captured from the parked vehicle. Emergency responders arrived and pronounced him dead at the scene. The cause was cardiac arrest from electrical exposure. Investigators later identified the concealed power source and setup, confirming it had been deliberately constructed. What defined the case wasn't just the method, but the absence of safeguards. No cutoff, no failsafe, no margin, no interruption once it began. What stands out is the asymmetry. John believed he was escalating within limits, pushing reactions while maintaining control. But those limits had already been removed. Once the system had no stopping point, The outcome stopped being uncertain. The gap between those realities wasn't distance or timing. It was the deliberate design of a scenario where recovery was no longer possible.